This is the story of two machines that defined armored combat. One was a workhorse that shouldn't have won. The other was an apex predator that couldn't stop losing. The Sherman versus Panzer showdown isn't about who had the better tank. It's about who understood the war they were fighting. And spoiler, America's tin can won the war. The Sherman was born out of failure. America's pre-war tanks were either undergunned toys or awkward contraptions like the M3 Lee, a tank so ungangly that its main gun stuck out the side like a badly placed porch. Crews hated it, but it bought time until engineers could deliver something better. That something was the M4 Sherman. Introduced in 1942, the Sherman wasn't revolutionary. It carried a 75mm gun designed for infantry support, not tank duels. Armor thickness was modest, 50 to 75mm, depending on the model. What it did have was reliability. Its engines started, its transmissions didn't fall apart every 50 miles, and its tracks could be replaced without swearing in 3 languages. It was the tank equivalent of a Ford pickup. Not glamorous, but it got the job done. Crew comfort, if that word applies to riding in a steel furnace, was surprisingly decent. 5 men had enough space to operate without stepping on each other's toes, and more importantly, they had hatches to escape from if the worst happened. German tanks often became coffins when penetrated. Shermans at least gave their crews a chance to bail out. Post-war studies confirmed that survival rates for Sherman crews were better than those of their German counterparts. The real genius of the Sherman wasn't in the tank itself, but in how it was built. American industry treated it like a mass-produced consumer product. Interchangeable parts meant a broken tank could be fixed quickly, sometimes with pieces stripped from another wreck. Production was spread across multiple plants. The M4A1s with radial engines, the M4A2s with diesels, the M4A3s with Ford V8s, but all were still Shermans. Mechanics could swap parts between them with minimal fuss. Numbers tell the tale. Between 1942 and 1945, America built over 49,000 Shermans. At peak output, more than 2,000 a month rolled off assembly lines. By comparison, Germany never came close with its Panzers. Where the Germans built machines like custom furniture, the US built them like toasters. Critics are right that the Sherman wasn't the best tank on the battlefield. Against a Panther or Tiger, its 75mm gun was woefully inadequate and its armor too thin. But the Sherman was never meant to duel big cats head-on. It was designed for speed, reliability, and combined arms warfare, fighting alongside infantry, artillery, and air support. The tragedy is that war often forced it into mismatched duels it wasn't designed for. Yet despite those disadvantages, the Sherman carried Allied armies from North Africa to Berlin. The Sherman was the tank America could build, quickly, in massive numbers, and with enough reliability to keep it rolling. It wasn't the apex predator of the battlefield, it was the dependable workhorse. And in global war, that made all the difference. While America built a practical workhorse, Germany kept reaching for armored perfection. The result was a series of tanks that looked terrifying on paper, but often collapsed under their own weight. The Panzer I and II were glorified training wheels, armed with machine guns or a 20mm autocannon. They worked against Polish cavalry in 1939, but were hopeless once real tanks arrived. The Panzer III and IV were Germany's true early war backbone. The III started with a 37mm gun, later a 50mm, meant for tank duels. The IV began as infantry support with a short 75mm, but evolved into the real workhorse of the Wehrmacht, endlessly upgraded with longer guns and thicker armor. By 1943, most Allied crews were far more likely to face a Panzer IV than a Tiger. Then came the beasts. The Tiger I appeared in 1942, weighing 57 tons and mounting the dreaded 88mm gun. It could kill a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman couldn't even scratch it. Crews adored it, enemies feared it. But reality bit hard. It was unreliable, guzzled fuel, and only 1,300 were ever built. The Tiger was more terror weapon than war winner. The Panther, introduced in 1943, was Germany's attempt to copy the Soviet T-34 while still indulging its love of over-engineering. On paper it was brilliant. Sloped armor, a high-velocity 75mm gun, and decent speed. In practice, it was fragile. Early Panthers broke down so often that more were lost to their own mechanics at Kursk than to Soviet shells. By war's end, about 6,000 had been built. Deadly, but never in enough numbers. Finally, the Tiger II and the King Tiger. Nearly 70 tons, even thicker armor, and a gun that could shred any Allied tank at absurd ranges. It was virtually indestructible from the front, but it was too heavy for most bridges, too thirsty for Germany's empty fuel tanks, and too slow to be everywhere it needed to be. Only about 490 rolled off the line before the Reich collapsed. This was the German problem in miniature, brilliance without practicality. Each new design grew bigger, heavier, and more complex, while German factories struggled to keep up under bombing and shortages. Instead of producing thousands of reliable tanks like the Sherman, Germany built a handful of mechanical divas. They looked unstoppable until they broke down or ran out of gas. The Sherman was built to win wars. The Panther and Tiger were built to win duels. And wars aren't won by duels. Tanks win battles, but factories win wars. The Sherman's greatest advantage wasn't its gun or armor. It was the American assembly line. The United States could build tanks the way it built cars, fast, cheap, and interchangeable. Germany, by contrast, treated its tanks like custom furniture, with all the delays and fragility that implies. At plants like Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal and Ford's Willow Run, Shermans rolled out by the thousands. Engines, transmissions, and guns were standardized, so a mechanic in France could swap parts with one from a tank built in California. Variants existed, M4A1s, A2s, A3s, but all were fundamentally the same. If one broke down, you had another running in days. Germany's factories were a mess. Strategic bombing crippled production, skilled labor was scarce, and forced laborers sabotaged what they built. Hitler's obsession with constant upgrades meant parts weren't always compatible, making repairs a nightmare. Producing a Tiger was practically a handcrafted job, and every perfect tank wasted time and resources. The numbers were brutal. The US built over 49,000 Shermans. Germany managed about 6,000 Panthers and 1,300 Tiger Is, plus under 500 King Tigers. That's 55,000 versus barely 8,000. Even if a Panther killed 3 Shermans, the math still didn't work. By the time Germany finished building one Tiger, the Allies had built an armored battalion. Logistics sealed the deal. Shermans ran on the same fuel as Jeeps and trucks. Spare parts were shipped in bulk. Fuel, food, ammo, all flowed on reliable supply lines. German tanks guzzled high-octane fuel that didn't exist in 1945. Many Panzers were abandoned not because they were destroyed, but because they ran dry. German officers often joked bitterly that they weren't fighting the US Army so much as General Motors and Ford. They weren't wrong. Industrial capacity was the Allies' secret weapon, and it buried the Panzers under a tidal wave of steel. The factory floor decided the outcome, long before many duels were fought. The Sherman's combat debut came under the blazing desert sun. In late 1942, British forces first fielded the new tank at El Alamein against Panzer IIIs and early IVs. The Sherman proved its worth. Its 75mm gun was versatile enough, and more importantly, it kept running in conditions that made German engines choke. For the Americans, the trial came during Operation Torch in North Africa. Green U.S. crews, facing Rommel's battle-hardened Afrika Korps, learned fast and painfully. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German panzers and 88mm guns shredded American forces. Shermans burned, units broke, and U.S. commanders were humiliated. Rommel mocked them as amateurs, and he was right. But amateurs backed by Detroit don't stay amateurs for long. The Americans regrouped. They fixed tactics, brought in artillery and air support, and leaned on the Sherman's strengths, reliability and numbers. By the Tunisia campaign, Sherman's outnumbered the Panzers 2 or 3 to 1, and their sheer presence wore the Afrika Korps down. German crews respected the Sherman, even if they didn't fear it, and Rommel himself noted it was superior to Britain's earlier models. North Africa revealed the Sherman's true character. It wasn't invincible, it wasn't unstoppable, but it was good enough to fight toe-to-toe with mid-war German armor, and it could do so reliably. More importantly, America could ship more of them every month. The desert was the Sherman's baptism of fire, and it passed. The Panzer III had met its match, and the balance of armored warfare was starting to shift. If North Africa was the Sherman's baptism, Italy was its trial by mud, mountains, and mines. The campaign was supposed to be a quick drive up the peninsula. Instead, it turned into a grinding slugfest where terrain was as deadly as German guns. The Sherman landed in Sicily in July 1943 and then rolled onto the Italian mainland. There, the tanks faced steep hills, narrow roads, and endless rivers. Armor that excelled in open desert suddenly found itself trapped on goat paths and funneled into kill zones. Every village seemed to hide a Panzerfaust or an 88mm gun waiting around the corner. Anzio in 1944 brought the Sherman face to face with the Panther. The German Cat easily outgunned it, and Sherman crews learned the hard way that charging head-on was suicide. But the Allies adapted. Instead of dueling, they used artillery, infantry, and air support to counter the Panthers. The Sherman wasn't meant to be a gladiator, it was part of a team. Innovation flourished in Italy. Engineers bolted dozer blades onto Shermans to clear rubble. Others mounted flamethrowers to burn out bunkers, earning the nickname Zippos. Mine flail Shermans, with rotating chains beating the ground ahead, cleared safe paths through minefields. These oddball variants turned the Sherman into a Swiss Army knife of armored warfare. Italy never gave the Sherman the glory of sweeping victories, but it showed off its adaptability. Against Panthers and dug-in defenses, it wasn't the Sherman's individual strength that mattered. It was the ability to keep rolling, to improvise, and to fight as part of a larger machine. Slowly, painfully, the Shermans clawed their way up the peninsula. They weren't the stars of the show, but they were the reason the show could go on. D-Day put the Sherman back in the spotlight. On June 6, 1944, amphibious DD Shermans paddled toward the Normandy beaches under fire. Some sank immediately, but enough made it ashore to give infantry precious armored support. Without them, the landings would have been far bloodier. Then came the bocage. Normandy wasn't open desert. It was a maze of thick hedgerows, centuries-old earthworks that turned every field into a fortress. German defenders with Panthers, Tigers, and Panzerfausts turned the terrain into a slaughterhouse. Shermans advancing into a field could be ambushed from point-blank range by a hidden gun just a few feet away. The Panther thrived here. Its long 75mm gun could destroy a Sherman before the American crew even spotted it. The Tiger was rarer but terrifying. One tank at Villa Bocage, commanded by Michael Wittmann, ambushed a column and destroyed over a dozen vehicles in minutes. For weeks, Sherman crews paid for every hedgerow with blood and steel. But adaptation saved them again. U.S. engineers welded metal prongs, rhino cutters, to the front of Shermans, allowing them to smash through hedgerows instead of driving around them into ambushes. British forces unveiled the Sherman Firefly, retrofitted with the 17-pounder gun. Finally, here was a Sherman that could kill a Tiger or Panther frontally. German tankers quickly learned to pick out Fireflies and target them first. Normandy proved the Sherman's weaknesses brutally. Thin armor, weaker gun, vulnerable to ambush. But it also highlighted Allied flexibility. Shermans didn't need to win every duel. They just needed to keep pushing. Behind them were artillery. P-47 Thunderbolts, and an endless supply of reinforcements. The Bocage chewed up Shermans by the hundreds, but it also bled the Panzer divisions dry. By the time the breakout came in late July, the balance was clear. Panthers and Tigers might rule a field, but the Shermans ruled the battlefield. By summer 1944, the Sherman's true strength was on full display. Not in one-on-one duels, but in the cold math of attrition. The Allies could afford to lose tanks. Germany could not. For every Tiger that rolled off the line, America shipped dozens of Shermans. In Normandy alone, U.S. factories replaced losses faster than they occurred. A German crew might knock out 5 Shermans in a day, only to find 10 more waiting for them tomorrow. Allied tank battalions were meat grinders designed to outlast, not outclass. Crew survivability also tilted the scales. Early Shermans did burn readily, earning their cruel nicknames, but once wet ammo storage was introduced in 1943, the odds of a catastrophic fire dropped sharply. American crews often escaped a knockout, got reassigned, and climbed into a new Sherman. German crews weren't so lucky. Once a Tiger or a Panther was penetrated, escape was far less likely. Over time, Allied tankers gained experience while German crews were whittled away. Combat reports paint a grim but consistent picture. Shermans died in droves when forced into direct duels, but when used as intended, supporting infantry, working with artillery, and calling in airstrikes, they were lethal. A Sherman platoon didn't need to kill a Tiger. It just needed to pin it until a P-47 dropped a 1,000-pound bomb on its head. The German kill ratios, often cited as proof of Panzer superiority, ignore the bigger picture. Yes, a Tiger might average 5-to-1 kill counts, but with only a few hundred Tigers in service and tens of thousands of Shermans, the math was hopeless. Wars aren't won on ratios, they're won on results. In the end, the Sherman didn't need to be better, it just needed to be everywhere, all the time, until the enemy ran out of tanks, fuel, and crews. And that's exactly what happened. Tanks are machines, but wars are fought by people inside them. The Sherman and the Panzer weren't just metal, they were homes, prisons, and sometimes coffins for their crews. American crews were often young, barely out of high school. Training was short and sometimes crude, but they had one advantage: survival. A Sherman might get knocked out, but its 5-man crew usually had a chance to bail out. Many tankers fought multiple times in different machines, gaining experience the hard way. Veterans joked that the safest Sherman was the second one you served in. The first usually burned. German crews were different. They trained longer, operated with precision, and were often highly skilled. Tank aces like Michael Wittmann became legends, racking up dozens of kills in Tigers. But their odds of survival were lower. When a Tiger brewed up, escape was difficult, and replacements were scarce. A knocked-out crew was often gone for good, and Germany's pool of veterans dwindled as the war dragged on. On the American side, there were aces too. Lafayette Poole, commanding Shermans, destroyed over 250 enemy vehicles in just a few months before being wounded. His kill tally rivaled or exceeded that of many German heroes, but he never got the same publicity. For Allied crews, glory was less important than getting through the next day alive. Life inside the tanks was miserable. It was hot, cramped, and deafening. The smell of fuel, cordite, and sweat was constant. Sleep was rare, food was whatever you could heat on the engine, and every creak in the armor could be your last. Jokes and dark humor were survival tools. Crews mocked their own tanks as Ronsons or Tommy Cookers, laughing because the alternative was despair. The machines mattered, but the men mattered more. The Shermans gave its crews a fighting chance to live, learn, and fight again. The Panzer gave its crews prestige and power, but often no second chance. In the end, the human factor mirrored the machines themselves. One side valued endurance, the other perfection, and endurance won. By late 1944, the Reich was collapsing, but Germany still had one last card to play: the Ardennes Offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler threw his remaining Panthers, Tigers, and even King Tigers into a desperate push towards snow-covered forests, hoping to split the Allies and force a negotiated peace. At first, it worked. American units were caught off guard, and Shermans burned in the opening clashes. The King Tiger, with its monstrous gun and nearly impenetrable armor, seemed unstoppable. But its flaws were the same as always: too heavy, too slow, too fuel-hungry. Many never even reached the front before running dry or breaking down. The real killer wasn't the Shermans, it was the gasoline. German tanks guzzled fuel they didn't have, while Allied supply lines kept Shermans rolling. Some panzer crews abandoned perfectly functional machines because there wasn't enough petrol to move them. A tank without fuel is just an expensive bunker. Meanwhile, the Sherman proved its resilience once again. At Bastogne, Sherman supported the surrounded 101st Airborne, trading shots with Panthers in the snow. When Patton's Third Army counterattacked, it was Sherman's leading the charge, overwhelming the remaining German armor by sheer weight of numbers. The Bulge burned out in weeks. Germany lost tanks it couldn't replace and crews it couldn't spare. The Allies lost plenty too, but their factories and logistics erased those losses almost instantly. By January 1945, the German armored force was a shell of its former self. The Ardennes was the Panzer's last stand. It showed one final time that German tanks could terrify but not sustain. The Sherman wasn't glorious, but it was everywhere, and in the freezing forests of Belgium, that was enough to turn back the last German gamble. When the shooting stopped in 1945, the reputations of the Sherman and the Panzer took on lives of their own. The Tiger and Panther became legends, machines of mythic invincibility, while the Sherman was remembered as a death trap. But the facts tell a different story. Yes, early Shermans burned easily, but once wet ammo storage was introduced, their fire risk dropped sharply. Studies showed Sherman crews had better survival odds than German crews. The Tiger may have terrified enemies, but it also stranded its own crews when it broke down or ran out of fuel. The Panther was deadly, but its final drive was so fragile that long road marches killed more tanks than Allied gunners ever did. Kill ratios, often used to glorify German armor, missed the point. A Tiger might destroy 5 Shermans, but for every Tiger built, the U.S. built dozens of replacements. Wars are not math problems, they are contests of logistics, and Germany couldn't keep pace. After the war, the myth-making began. German veterans painted their tanks as unstoppable, undone only by Allied numbers. Hollywood ran with it, turning the Tiger into a cinematic dragon. The Shermans became a punchline, the Ronson that lights every time. The truth was more complex. The Sherman wasn't the best tank, it was the right tank, built for the war it had to fight. Legacy tells a tale. The Sherman fought on for decades. In Korea, in the Middle East, even into the 1970s, the Panther and Tiger, museum pieces and war gamer fantasies. Germany's monsters died with the Reich. America's tin can rolled on. History doesn't reward the most feared, it rewards the most effective. The Tiger inspired awe, the Sherman won the war. And between awe and victory, only one really matters. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please consider subscribing, and until next time, stand tall.